Hey, how is everybody doing? This is episode number 30. Episode number 33. I just typed it in, but can't remember. Episode number 33 of Kalibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. We have a lot to talk about today. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. I've missed doing solo podcasts, solo live streams with you guys. So I'm excited to get back into doing this. It's been a lot of guests on the show, and I've done a podcast, which is going to be coming out tomorrow. I had to run it by some checks and make sure that it was all good. Everything came out. So there will be a podcast posted tomorrow. Probably around 12 Eastern Standard Time, so be on the lookout for that. It is an interview I did with Grisha. So if you guys remember, he was on my first Calibrated live roundtable, and it was a very enjoyable episode that I got to record. Particularly, it was interesting because it kind of gives you a look at a Russian perspective, a young Russian's perspective. A lot of the times you get older people. Obviously, in this sort of information space, geopolitics and stuff, it tends to be older individuals. But with Grisha, it is a younger individual who is very tight with some of the aspects of the Russian military and Russian government. So that was a very interesting conversation, and that will be up tomorrow. But without further ado, let's get into the important stuff, and that would be map updates. Now, we are in a particularly weird time where the Ukrainians are massively throwing reserves at every single fire, basically every hotspot on the front. And the Russians are, moving appropriately, I would say right now. There aren't, massive assaults like we saw outside of Avdiivka when Avdiivka collapsed. Remember, there were a couple videos of some Russian units that got hit pretty hard when they went into Berdichi. Remember, we saw all the Abrams that were destroyed here, all of the Bradleys that were destroyed. So this area in particular right here has been just a very bloody scene for both sides. But, in terms of the trade, right? This is sometimes how you have to think about conflicts, battles, so on and so forth. The Russians, let's say that the Ukrainians and the Russians are going 1-for-1 right here, right? Which would be a higher loss ratio, I would say, for the Russians than they're normally used to in this conflict. But a 1-to-1 ratio when Ukraine is dangerously low on manpower and reserves compared to what Russia's situation is right now is very beneficial for the Russians. So this increased pressure, this willingness to put troops into dangerous situations with the hopes that the outcome will be beneficial for the Russians. That's what's going on right now. So you're seeing much more aggressive assaults now that so just for you guys, the reason why those Ukrainians were brought in, all of those reserves, those Abrams, those Bradleys and everything, was to hold this line, right? This line is extremely important for the Ukrainians to hold. There was no line of defense behind this. There was nothing prepared with any significance. So the Ukrainians had to hold this and create time, right? Buy space, create time. That's what they were trying to do. And they bought themselves 2 weeks. So whatever they could prepare back here in 2 weeks, that's about the amount of time that they've made for themselves at the cost of probably, dozens of battalions being rendered combat ineffective across multiple different fronts. This isn't just confined to Avdiivka. It's also happening up in the north around Bakhmut, especially in Ivanivsky. The battles have been very intense. Obviously, up here around Terny, you can see the situation is very unfortunate for the Ukrainian defenders that are not being readily supplied here. Remember, Ukraine is also under a glide bomb disadvantage where they have 100 to 200 glide bombs dropping on them daily across the entire front, and they are not dropping any glide bombs on the Russians, right? So that's one area where the Russians have advantages. The Russians also have Lancet drones. They also have a massive artillery advantage. Ukraine's artillery is becoming more and more scarce every day. Their ammunition issues are becoming more and more significant. So, you take it into account that the Ukrainians are militarily deficient compared to the Russians in the battle on the battlefield. And the Russians have more reserves ready to be pumped into any given place at any given time than the Ukrainians do. So again, it's more of like you're not looking for a big buildup and then an offensive. What you're seeing is just this pushing, forcing Ukraine to move their reserves around, trying to just wear out the army. And they're definitely doing it. And you can see it by the way that they're talking. We're going to cover some things that happened today, some events that happened that are very, very important to the future of this conflict. So, but just to start with the advancements, Russian forces were geolocated in this area via Ukrainian drones. Rumors and reports are that Tenenki has been completely captured by the Russians. We do not have the geolocation for it, but it would be incredibly difficult to hold this at this point. So I don't necessarily think that the Ukrainians will be in Tenenki very much longer. From Ukrainian reports now, and I'm going to adjust my map now because earlier today, the Russian sources were saying that Orlivka, which is this town right here, had been completely captured. That's not what I was hearing from both some other Russian sources and Ukrainian sources. But by the end of the day, Ukrainian sources have said that Orlivka has been completely captured by Russian forces. They had to leave. There was just nothing left, which is very realistic. The town has been shelled and bombed very heavily. The Ukrainians have been fighting desperately to maintain this because, again, this is the last line of defense. And they have retreated into Semkivka. So Semkivka is now the front line. And I don't know how long the Ukrainians are going to be able to hold this. I don't know what the fortifications are in this area. But since the Russians have already crossed over here and are applying pressure over here, I can't imagine this line is going to hold for very long. And we're going to see what the Ukrainians were able to do in those 2 weeks that they bought themselves. I'm concerned that the Ukrainians are not going to have reserves to actually stem another Russian, a breakthrough like we saw outside of Avdiivka. If another one of those happens after Semkivka, I don't know if the Ukrainians are going to be able to stabilize back here. Remember, this line of defense was actually built up. So when all those reserves were transferred in, the Russians got pushed back a little bit, and the Ukrainians reestablished themselves in those lines and were defending. Now those lines have been compromised. As soon as Berdichi falls and as soon as Semkivka falls, we could see the continuation of the sort of route we saw behind Avdiivka. But time will tell. We will see. We have reports that the Russians have advanced further outside of Novelsky to the west. Again, remember what I had talked about when I reference Russian movements and planning. What do they always do? They always follow the high ground. So going to take us over to the map real fast and just look at that high ground so you guys can see where the Russians are planning to go. All right. Remember, if you guys have questions or anything, you can go ahead and drop them. I will try to answer as many as I can. It's a more relaxed day now, so I'll be looking over at the chat a little bit more, just going over some stuff. We got a lot to talk about today, so this is going to be a longer video. Let's see. Stop sharing. Elevation map. All right, here we go. So here is Novelsky, and you can see that the Russians already have most of the high ground, but the continuation, the push out into this region will just give them more of a better high ground to look down on Pervomayskoye and the rest of this these urban settlements that are on this riverbed right here, as well as allow the Russians to begin pushing south towards the northern flank of Krasnohorivka and compromising the defense line that's set up facing Donetsk city. So again, these are very, very important movements. The Ukrainians are doing everything they can to prevent the Russians from breaking through in this region. If Krasnohorivka falls, the Ukrainians are going to have a very, very bad situation on their hands. So that's what they're dealing with right now. All right, let me go back to the map. Okay, so we have more reports of movement in Novomihailovka. Again, I don't have a geolocation right now, but it's sounding like this northern warehouse facility has been completely captured along with most of this. So I think the town is basically like 50-50 right now. Again, the Ukrainians are fighting very, very hard to prevent the Russians from breaking out of Pabieta. And the Russians are trying to break out of Pabieta because, again, this creates a salient and a difficult situation in Konstantinivka, which creates a difficult situation in Ugledar. In terms of overall map changes, it's been actually relatively slow. I think that's actually most of what I have to show you. Ukrainian sources are reporting that they are likely going to be leaving Robitny very soon if they have not already left. It is a gray zone, so again, this is more. I always say that this area of the map is more symbolic than anything. The Russians are just trying to get the Ukrainians out of what they achieved over their counteroffensive, really break that morale of whatever this is, while also just flattening the line. And then eventually a push towards Orikhiv may occur, but that's in the future. That's not going to happen right now. The focus is still in the east. All right, that's it for the map. I'll look over here and see if you guys got any questions. Kharkov is being evacuated. Some sources say, yeah, I've seen that too, but the Ukrainians do this quite frequently where they'll evacuate. I don't know what the actual purpose of it is. It doesn't really seem like there's actually a massive evacuation happening. So I don't know why they're always talking about that. I don't know if it's just like a propaganda thing. I really don't know. But they've done it a couple times in the past. So I wouldn't take that as like an impending Russian offensive or anything. Do you think it's a coincidence that Nuland, Kerry, Blinken all come from Ukraine? I think that do they all come from Ukraine? I didn't know that. I don't know. I think that the Ukraine project has been a thing for a very long time, and they were just the sort of the ambassadors for it. So, how can you tell? Let's see. How can you tell when the Russians are actively trying to capture an area instead of them just working to trick the Ukrainians? Because usually you get footage. So I'll show you guys, and this is something that you have to pay attention to very closely to when it comes to like Telegram channels. Ukrainian propaganda will all the time talk about Russian assaults that were repelled. Russian assault was repelled here. Russian assault was repelled here. Usually those aren't really Russian assaults. That's more of like, usually it's like recon. You send in a small unit. They, perform reconnaissance. They figure out where enemy positions are. Maybe they get shot at. Maybe they get hit by an FPV drone. That's part of, doing any sort of recon and force. So we get reports a lot that the well, let me think, where is it? We get reports all the time that the Russians are assaulting. Particularly, I remember this is when it came up most recently for me was in Marinka. The Ukrainian sources all the time talk about failed Russian assaults, failed Russian assaults, failed Russian assaults. And then if you listen to the Russians talk about what they were doing, they would move up into a gray zone area, wait until they basically got shot at by a machine gun nest or something, relay that information, then target that building. It was usually just a destroyed, abandoned basement in Marinka. They would just hit it with artillery until the Ukrainians left that position, and then they would move up. So, you have to kind of differentiate between what is an actual assault and what is a more of like, just applying pressure to keep like fixing Ukrainians in position, forcing reserves to come in, attriting the forces. A lot of that is what you'll see in the areas that don't really move very much, but there's always fighting. So in Avdiivka, what we're seeing is actual assaults. The Russians are assaulting. There's 10, 12 guys sometimes in these little assault units. They'll drive up a road. They'll drop guys off. Sometimes they get hit. Sometimes they secure something. These are actual assaults in this area. The Russians are actively trying to advance outside of Avdiivka. More around like Ugledar, Robitny, Urozhain, basically this entire southern front right here. This is all just poking and prodding, right? You don't want the Ukrainians to get relaxed and be able to move those reserves that are sitting there protecting that area to another area of the front because nothing's happening. So you're just constantly applying pressure. Same appearance in Kivka. The Russians are assaulting the town, but I think a lot of the time what they're doing is they are just attriting the Ukrainian forces that come up into this area. Same over here. Just because this is not an easy area logistically to get troops into. So getting the troops there, having them getting taken out, and then being forced to bring more troops and supplies in, it's very tedious on this section of the front due to the lack of roads. I mean, there's literally this highway and then this highway, and there's almost nothing in the middle here, right? This is just a big empty bunch of fields. Like right in between this, there's almost no roads. There's this road right here, but there's no interconnecting roads for this section of the front. So a lot of what is happening up here are very, very small. I guess you could call them assaults. They're very, very light. They're not super aggressive. They're not trying to necessarily capture ground. They're just trying to expose Ukrainian positions and then let the artillery and glide bombs do a majority of the work. All right, here we go. Can't watch live. We'll watch the VOD. Have a good evening. Also, I was seeing reports that Israel is running low on artillery shells. Have you heard anything on this? Yes, I have, and I will talk about it in this VOD. So thank you so much for your donation or your question, and I will answer that at the end once we start getting into the news articles. Here we go. No talk of the mighty Slovenians. I don't know what exactly you're referring to, but I'm curious. And Tyler, I heard Putin discussing this buffer zone. Do you think this will mean a new offensive very soon or soon with new fronts? Thanks again, man. Well, thank you first off, Tyler. You're awesome. And yes, I will cover that in just a second as well. It is one of my articles. But yeah, Putin he won his reelection, right? I don't think anybody was necessarily thinking he was going to lose. But we're going to also talk about that. That's our next topic and what this stream is titled. So we'll get into that in just a second. But that's it for the map today. Not a lot of change, but the Russians are now on the offensive and have the initiative on almost the entire front again. After that 2-week sort of stabilization that the Ukrainians did, bringing in a lot of reserves, the Ukrainians suffered tremendously over those 2 weeks. I'll just say that. And I think that it was sort of their last big hurrah. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't have anything left, but this Belgorod operation, the attempt at stabilizing the line, the introduction of the Abrams, a lot of Bradleys were thrown into combat. They expended a lot, and they don't have a ton to expend. So we'll see how it plays out. All right. No questions. Support Dono. Keep up the great work. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And again, guys, if you have any questions, I love the support. I love it so much. But if you have any questions in the future, especially people who donate, come into my DMs and just ask away. I'll talk with you for hours if that's what is required to answer your questions. So I really appreciate it, and take care. All right. Let's get into some articles that we have here to talk about today. So this is we can just talk about the election. So Putin won his re-election. He won by I think probably 85%, which in the West we're very happy if we get 51% of the votes. That's how Western democracy works, right? Obviously, Russia is a more of an authoritarian regime, I guess you would call it. If you're being a realistic person, we can talk about how this, that, and the other, whatever. There was very little chance that Putin was going to lose. There's not a lot of strong opposition by design and by just by the circumstances of the situation that Russia is in right now. Putin does not want, Russians, do not want Putin removed right now. That is not what you want during a wartime situation. I do think it was a great idea for the Russians to have the elections. I think that it particularly makes the Ukrainians look very bad that they did not have their elections. Although I fully understand why the Ukrainians did not have their elections. It makes complete sense. I mean, they are being invaded. They are under martial law. It's not the best time for them to replace their president. I fully get it, but I do think it makes Russia look a little bit better. When people talk about the voting being rigged and everything, I don't agree with that. I do believe that the choices are your options are a little rigged. There's no better option than Putin on the voting list, and there's not going to be because of this situation, right? But even third-party sources outside of Russia, who people refer to all the time, put Putin's approval rating somewhere between 75 and 85%, right? In Russia. Those are third-party sources. That's not, polling done by the Kremlin or anything. These are pretty accepted numbers. So you're talking about a wartime president who is winning the war, who is, showing basically that he survived the Western sanctions. All of Russia has been shown the Russophobia in Eastern Europe, particularly in Europe in general. The U.S. has said that, or France has said that Russia is a, existential threat to their existence. So, how do you expect Putin not to be popular right now? This is what I think is so frustrating to a lot of the pro-Ukrainians who are very upset about this re-election. I think it was really the last breath of copium that they had that Putin might not be elected this time, that something might happen. I do believe that's what most of the Belgorod operation was about, was trying to make Putin look weak or something. It just all is very desperate, right? They didn't accomplish anything in Belgorod. They got their ass handed to them, actually. Again, makes Russia look very competent, makes Putin look competent protecting the borders. And then he wins the election outstandingly. Whether you believe it or not, it doesn't really matter. It happened, right? It doesn't matter. And he's going to be president for the next 6 years. And that's just the way it's going to be. And people are going to be upset about that. But I mean, what is the better option for Russia? This is something that I want to ask everybody in this chat, or have them ask themselves. Who is the better option for Russia? The only better option, and some people would say maybe perhaps a hardliner who would be more critical of Europe, because Putin is so soft with Europe. Even after all of this shit, he is so soft. Putin is a soft, liberal-esque leader. He's starting to harden his heart, I believe. But in terms of his relationship with Europe, he is about as soft as it gets in Russia. I don't know why there's all of this, Putin needs to go, Putin this, that, and the other. Guys, there's no, whoever replaces Putin is going to be more of that Putin Hitler-esque personality than you claim Putin is right now. It's just so stupid. It doesn't make any sense. So Putin reelected, and upon his reelection, the first thing he talks about is the cross-border raids. And I specifically talked about this before the election started. I said, I think that this is going to backfire on Ukraine so bad. The best thing that could have happened is the Ukrainians secured a town for a couple of days, made Russia look weak, this, that, and the other, right? That didn't happen. Now what it looks like is, Putin is already talking about a buffer zone, a large buffer zone through the Sumy Chernigov regions, giving Russia proper a buffer zone from artillery shelling and invasion, which, makes good sense, right? And this is what I've also said for the entire conflict is Russia has red lines, right? You cross those red lines and there's going to be consequences. And this has been a constant meme throughout this entire conflict is, Russian red line this, Russian red line that, nuke threat this, nuke threat that. And what you're about to see is all of those red lines enforced. That's what's going to happen. So we have the missile threat that Russia had warned about. We have the invasion threat and the shelling threat that Russia had warned Ukraine about. None of those were adhered to. And now you're going to see less Ukraine. And I believe you're going to see a lot less Ukraine. And it's going to continue to get less and less the longer they fight. And that is where we come to our next topic of discussion. And I'm going to take us over to that right now, that article. And that would be Lindsey Graham's visit to Ukraine. So Lindsey, the Muppet Man Graham himself, visited Ukraine. Almost as bad as Newland, but he's just a little bit dumber and less savvy when it comes to foreign policy. I despise this human being. This human being is the essence of what I do not like about my country, about why I do, let me think about this. The reason why I am so negative about U.S. foreign policy quite frequently is because of this individual and people like this individual. He says the stupidest things. He makes the U.S. look absolutely atrocious, horrible. I'll go over his tweet that he put out today. It makes us look like the bad guys. That is what this human being does to the U.S. image. And he just went and did classic Lindsey Graham stuff. So he goes to Kiev and he urges Ukraine to pass a mobilization law. So Zelensky's been trying for quite some time now to get this mobilization law passed. It's just addendums or amendments to the mobilization bill that's already in place, which would allow the mobilization of Ukrainians aged 18 to 27, which is a very bad idea for Ukraine. I've said for a long time, and I will say it right now on record, if Ukraine mobilizes this group of men, if they go through with this, Ukraine has sealed their fate. There will be no Ukraine after this point, okay? So Ukraine decides to mobilize these men. That's their choice, whatever. That is the death sentence for Ukraine. That will be the end. But Lindsey Graham doesn't care. Lindsey Graham doesn't really give a shit about Ukraine. He doesn't care about Ukrainians. He doesn't care about Europe at all. Why would Lindsey Graham care? He's a sociopath, right? No. So he goes over and he basically says, even without U.S. support, because he can't guarantee U.S. support because he has no fucking power in his in the GOP. He's saying even without U.S. support, Ukraine should continue fighting. This, that, and the other. It's just I have a hard time even reading what he would say. But here's a quote from him. I would hope those eligible to serve in the Ukrainian military would join. I can't believe it's at 27. He told reporters, you are in a fight for your life, so you should be serving, not at 25 or 27. We need more people in the line. We need more people in the line because his career is on the line as well. Lindsey Graham has overinvested in the Ukraine project, just like Newland did, just like other people did. And so, yeah, I mean, he's screwed. That's why he's there. Everybody else has jumped ship, literally everybody. But Lindsey Graham is still there because this is his project. He needs this to work. And the way he sees this working is by saying, well, if there are no more Ukrainians left at the end of this, who's going to complain about what the U.S. did to Ukraine, right? That's literally has to be his thinking, because mobilizing this group of men is the end of Ukraine. And you can take that to the bank, that this is a death sentence for the future of Ukraine. Ukraine is already probably dead, just demographically, with all of the immigration at the beginning of the war, all of that stuff. Ukraine is just demographically already dead, but this group of men has been protected the entire time, and now they're going to be forced into the trenches. So should be interesting. We got some more questions. Sorry, I'm not keeping up with them. Alinsky calls off elections and democracy. No, you gotta remember, guys, Ukraine is in an existential fight for its life, right? Changing leadership, changing president right now. Listen, humans are very, very stupid. Even if, Zelensky probably could get reelected, honestly. But having an election right now is just such a huge risk for Ukraine, because I haven't said this before, but I've been thinking it. The worst thing that could happen in a Ukrainian election is Vladimir Putin winning. And I don't mean him receiving votes. I don't mean anything like that. But something happening in the election that sows distrust, sows some sort of chaos, would be very, very bad for Ukraine right now. So while, yes, it's very fun to be, memeing about, oh, Ukraine doesn't have elections, Russia might have this election, but Ukraine has no election. It's funny, but it's not necessarily logical when you're talking about the situation in Ukraine. They have to do what's right for them to continue fighting if that's what their goal is. The survival of Ukraine is more important than an election, in my personal opinion. Agreed. There is no democratic alternative in Russia that would have any real support. Most of the other options are insane. Yeah. Like, you guys want the communists to win? Like, that's the next most popular party in Russia, right? I don't necessarily have a problem with modern communism. Like, modern communists, they're usually just people that want more free stuff. But yeah, there's not a real viable option. And does there need to be? Because Putin is what Russia needs right now. I think that Russians would agree that life is much better in 2024 Russia during the SMO with Putin as president than life was in 1998. If you're looking at his body of work, Russia has improved tremendously in the last 25 years. So that is what it is. All right. Could the cross-dress... God, you guys, be the Antichrist. Listen, I don't deal with any of that stuff. I don't talk about Antichrist or anything like that. I just think that these are, people. They're just greedy people doing greedy things. That's all it is. Let's see, what was the second part of the question? Also, do you think the US, France, Germany would stop elections, go to war, locking in Biden and stopping Trump from being elected? I would not put anything past the Dems right now. They seem very desperate. I had said for a long time that I believe that the US will be in a war before the elections. It looks like the US is fighting very, very hard to prevent that with their communications with Iran, releasing funds for Iran, stuff like that. So we might not see a war, but I don't think Biden can win re-election right now with his mental state, with the way Ukraine is going to be looking at the end of this year, probably with what's about to happen in Rafah with Israel, potentially southern Lebanon with Israel if the U.S. keeps supporting that. That's the Democrats do not appreciate what Israel is doing in Palestine. So they're in a very difficult situation. And who knows? They already tried to throw the book at Trump to try to get him off of the ballots and everything. Who knows? I think we're entering the banana republic stage of U.S. democracy. So Putin is soft on Europe. He sees long-term potential for trade and weakening Western cohesion and U.S. engagement in Europe, which can happen. Thoughts? I think it could have happened before all of this went down. I think that Putin is smart, right? Europe is a huge market. Russia does not want to lose that European market. It's just an easy place to sell your energy to, right? But now probably not. I don't think that there's any way that without some serious fundamental government changes in Europe, that's going to happen. Until there's a bunch of people who are thinking slightly more like Orban or I don't know, any other European leaders that are saying, hey, maybe we should not be so aggressive towards Russia because we still need cheap energy in the future for European survival. I don't know. He is very soft on Europe. He's still very soft on Europe. He's from St. Petersburg, man. He's basically European. It's I don't know. I think that he is the right person for the job. I've said it the whole time. I am a Putin fan, not in everything that he does, but I think that he, at least, even if he's being greedy in what he does, because I think all politicians are greedy, obviously, he's at least doing something to benefit Russia. I think Russia is gaining from what he's doing compared to the U.S. We're just continuously losing. We're on the back foot. We've been losing. So thank you for your questions, though. Lindsey Graham in town wants Ukraine to mobilize. And then the last bit from The Hill, I have this article talking about Johnson's plan B for Ukraine, leaves questions unanswered. Speaker Mike Johnson's plan B for Ukraine aid has raised many questions. Has raised as many questions as it's answered. The speaker told Republican senators last week that he intended to send them legislation providing new military funding for Kiev after the House considers a separate spending package to prevent a government shutdown on Friday. So again, the aid is currently deadlocked in the U.S. bureaucratic process. Right, we have the House, which is controlled by the Republicans, not wanting to pass this legislation, this funding bill, without the appropriate border concessions from the Democrats. The Democrats cannot make border concessions because that would be a tremendous L for Biden going into the 2024 election. He would look incredibly weak and bowing down to the Republicans to send money to Ukraine. It's a very bad look. I had said the whole time I thought that funding would pass, but at this point it's starting to seem like it might not. So who knows? Money rules all. So I'm still definitely saying that Ukraine aid is probably going to pass, but it's looking like the Republicans might take this all the way through the election, which is a good idea for them because if they don't, then they're going to be stuck with this Ukraine project into Biden's years or into Trump's years in office if Trump wins. I don't know, guys. I think that Ukraine is about to get shafted the way every U.S. proxy for all of U.S. history has been shafted outside of Israel. So, but Israel isn't really a proxy. Israel's different. Ukraine is a proxy. All right. If you guys have some questions, go ahead and get some questions in. Just it doesn't have to be like super thanks or anything. You guys can just ask questions. That was all that I wanted to talk about today. Actually, I have some bookmarks, some stuff that I want to talk about. I wanted to show you guys that Lindsey Graham tweet too. Let's see. Why have we heard so much less about the Bakhmut area in 2023 compared to 2024? Just because there's not a huge battle going on in the Bakhmut area, right? The Battle of Bakhmut was the center of the fighting, just like Avdiivka was the center of the fighting. Now, Ivanivsky is sort of a tertiary battle. It's not the main battle, so you just don't hear about it as much. As soon as fighting reaches Chasiv Yar, the focus will probably go back to that area. Have you heard that Russia is preparing war crime tribunals that will publicly name everyone responsible for the war? Newland, Lindsay are certainly on the list. Oh, I don't know. I don't really care about any of that stuff. All of the political jockeying for position, political statements just are they're important to pay attention to, but stuff like that, war crime trials for politicians in foreign countries. I mean, that's like an ICC warrant for Putin. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything, right? So, I mean, I put that into the same category. I don't care about it. It would be a big step, but I don't really care. All right. The press secretary of the Ukrainian Air Force, Yuri Engant, was fired. This is a big deal. This is a propagandist right here. That's what a press secretary is. And he was the guy who was claiming Su-24 or Su-34s were shot down every day, even though they weren't being shot down. So this man has been removed. And funny enough, as soon as he was removed, Su-34 stopped dropping out of the sky, multiple times a day. Interesting, but again, another purge. Zelensky wants all yes men. The same goes for Deep State. I do not use Deep State as a source anymore. I use them as a information tool, but I do not use Deep State as a source. Deep State has been absorbed into the Ukrainian armed forces or Ukrainian government. They work on behalf of the Ukrainians now, more so than before. Their information is very poor. It's very delayed. They ignore geolocations just because they want their map to look more pleasing for the Ukrainian side. So no more Deep State map for me. Unless they are omitting something, then it's important to look at. But outside of that, do not expect them to be a up-to-date source. Deep State was doing really good, guys. Listen, Deep State was was way ahead of the Russian sources during the Battle of Avdiivka. During that battle, they were reporting Russian advances and making the situation look horrible for the Ukrainians way before the Russians were. So they were a good source right up until Zaluzhny was fired, Soski was brought in, and then that was incorporated into the Ukrainian establishment. So Deep State, no longer a source. Obviously, I mean, I just wanted to show you guys this. This is the shelling of Belgorod. They're just firing multiple launch rocket systems into public areas, trying to terrorize. It's literally what it is, terror. They're trying to prevent people from going and voting and, causing a scene. This is why Ukraine will be smaller and will not have its northern regions of Chernigov and Sumy. I mean, that's when it happens, everybody's going to scream and cry about the Russians taking more and more. And we can just point to this and say, well, we know exactly why they did it, because they were shelling civilians. I mean, they warned you, you didn't listen, and now you found out, right? This was a pretty interesting thing. I don't know what exactly happened with it, but a military helicopter that was very much out of commission, you can see in this video right here. when it gets to the second part. You can see that the helicopter was, hello? Oh yeah, you can see that the windows are out. It's been here for like 20 years just sitting, so it's non-operational, non-significant. It just burned down. But it is in Transnistria, so this is what could be considered an attack by the Ukrainians. That's what the Russian side is claiming, or the Transnistrian side is saying. I don't know, though, just because they put a content warning on this. It's just a burnt helicopter. I don't know about this. It doesn't seem, I mean, there's other things that the Ukrainians could hit. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was a way for Russian FSB, Russian intelligence, to start coordinating very closely with the Ukrainians. This is like the most insignificant false flag attack, but you can just say, oh, look, the Ukrainians are starting to pay attention to Transnistria. We can just come over here and start exchanging intel. We can start basically controlling the situation in the country. I don't know. It could be Ukrainian. It could be Russian. Either way, I don't think it really matters, right? It's a useless helicopter that's basically a piece of art that's just sitting in a parking lot. It doesn't do anything. I don't know. But I would not put a lot of weight on this. I don't think that it's a big deal in general. Here's that following yesterday's victory speech by Russian President Vladimir Putin, in which he stated a sanitary zone would be needed to establish between Russia and Ukraine before the end of the war. The Kremlin has now announced that due to the recent Ukrainian drone attacks and shelling of Russian territory, the only way to provide protection to the Russian population would be to construct a buffer zone or sanitary zone on the Ukrainian border that would place Russian regions beyond the range of Ukrainian fire. I'll take us over to the map because we can talk about what that exactly means. If you want to put the Ukrainians out of artillery range, that would be, you'd probably need to get them out of HIMARS range in total. So you're looking at, let's see, from any given region, you're looking at, from right here, you're looking at probably like an 80-kilometer buffer zone at least, right? That's what you would need. I would just say probably 100, right? You get everything out of the range. So 100, 100 kilometer buffer zone would be like 60 miles, something like that. So all the way around like that, something like that. Which, if you're looking at the map, does this make sense? Not really, right? What makes sense is Chernigov, Sumy, probably Poltava, Kharkov, right? Just everything east of the river. That's the situation that the Ukrainians have got themselves in now. That's what's going to happen. All right, let's see. Do you think that NATO transferred more air defense than publicly acknowledged by transferring them from the Middle East? They lost a lot of this. Yeah. I don't know. I don't really think so. I think that one of the biggest points of delivering equipment is that you shout it from the rooftop that you're delivering it. You might see some more equipment in the form of like BMPs, armored vehicles, stuff like that, like light armored vehicles. More of those might have been delivered than initially announced. And there definitely is probably more equipment than was announced that has been delivered, potentially ammunition. But I think in terms of like the big stuff, like artillery and stuff like that, the West would gloat about it. They would virtue signal, because that's the whole point of this at this point, is to make sure that everybody knows that you're doing something to support Ukraine, so that when they lose, you can say, well, we were doing stuff till the end. Look at what Greece just sent. They just sent like 100 pieces of artillery that are from 1942. They were used in the Korean War by the US. It's just garbage. They're just sending garbage now. At no range, very immobile, heavy. It's just garbage. So Yeah. All right. Any more questions you guys have? Get them in, get them in, get them in. I'll talk for a little bit longer. Did I have anything else that I wanted to show you guys? No, that's it. All right. How much further do the Russians need to go before the Ukrainians can't shell Donetsk anymore? I would say, like with everything, probably about 100 kilometers, right? So you have Donetsk. Oh, wait, shell Donetsk? Or like, I mean, you can still hit Donetsk with like HIMARS and stuff. So if you're just talking about normal artillery shelling, like another 10 to 20 miles probably. So, 30 to 40 kilometers. Right, is probably what you would need to completely protect Donetsk. However, usually it wouldn't probably come out like that, because say you advance 5 miles, right? If the front line is now like out here, then Ukrainian artillery has to be placed like back here. So that would probably put it out of range of Donetsk. So, realistically capturing Krasnohorivka and pushing the line out to about here would put the Ukrainians likely out of artillery range. Or if they wanted to shell Donetsk, they would bring their artillery dangerously close to the front and it would be exposed, which is probably also a worthwhile trade for the Russians. The Greeks are on the wrong side of history. A lot of these countries didn't get to choose what side of history they're on. They're just in Europe, so they don't. If these countries don't support the narrative, they lose their EU funding. It's unfortunate. What's your opinion on the Russian economy after the war? I think that the Russian economy is going to be extremely strong, especially when the pressure is let up and trade opens back up. If that ever happens with Europe and the United States, I believe you will see a Russian economy that goes into a boom. The Russian economy is already running hot, so we'll see. In a good way, running hot. They have a lot of budgetary surplus this year, so a lot more military spending is occurring, and they have room for more military spending without sacrificing in other areas because of the additional profits they've made off of their oil and gas. Remember, guys, Europe is still buying Russian oil. That never stopped. It just buys it more expensively through India now, right? And with these strikes, Russian oil has increased in price. I don't know if you guys know how much oil and gas Russia produces, but these refinery strikes are not putting a dent in that. They have massive reserves as is. So these refinery strikes are this is like the new copium is like Russian oil production is through the floor. First off, it takes 1 to 2 months to replace these repair these refineries, depending on the damage. If it's like crazy extensive, 3 to 4 months maybe, but most of the refineries that were hit in the beginning are likely back online at this point or about to come back online. So it's this, the Ukrainians need a concerted drone bombing campaign that targets these things every couple weeks, retargets them to keep them out of business. And the Ukrainians just aren't able to do that. They don't have the capacity to do that. Remember, Russia was invaded by the Nazis, who were bombing the shit out of all of their industry for forever. Same with the Brits. Same with a lot of different countries that have been invaded, or not been invaded, but have been at war. It is difficult to take industry offline if you have the means to attack their industry, and the Ukrainians barely have the means to attack Russian industry. So it's still it's annoying. I'm sure the Russians would prefer to not have this happening, but again, drone strikes means that Russia has an excuse to continue pushing its borders, right? And that's the maximum Russian goal. I showed you guys what the maximum Russian goal is. I believe that that's what the Russians want, and I believe that Ukraine is just continuously giving every excuse for the Russians to do that. If the Ukrainians weren't doing this, I mean, it's not making a difference. You can go anywhere. You can look at the Russian exports haven't slowed down at all. The refinery situation would take a very long time to even start to affect Russia alone. if it was sufficient. So, I mean, overall, it's just like mosquito bites, right? It's annoying. They're itchy, they bug, but they go away eventually, and it doesn't hurt your overall health, right? One of those mosquitoes could have malaria, right, and do some real damage. But yeah, no. Here, this is funny. Drone strikes give Russia an excuse to keep expanding westward or expanding their borders. You say that, but what did Putin just say? Like, what did Putin just say? He literally came out and said, because of the drone strikes, because of the cross-border raids, we are going to have to create a sanitation zone, right? We need to create a buffer zone. So you say that I'm an idiot for saying that, but Putin just said it. Whether you believe him or not, it doesn't matter. This is what's going to happen, right? So that's what you're dealing with. You're an idiot for not understanding that. It's so simple. I'm not saying anything radical. I'm quoting the guy himself. All right. I believe the Russian oil production is going down when the barrel is at 1 to 600, and then good case. Goodbye to Brandon. Yeah. Again, this is another thing that people don't really understand about these oil refinery strikes is it's just increasing the price of oil. Russia is just selling its oil for more than it was before, and the U.S. is, I mean, the U.S. population, European population is now dealing with higher oil and gas prices because of these strikes. Not exclusively, production rates have also been cut in OPEC Plus and in Russia. So it's kind of a, you know, it's just stacking on top of each other at this time. It's a multi-layered issue, and it's not doing what the Ukrainians want it to do. What do you hear about Ukrainian push to open a new port? Do you think the Odessa strikes out that off? It's going to be hard to push open a new port during peace. I mean, during war. I don't see how they do that. It's just going to be infested with guarantees all the time. I don't see how that's possible. Nothing is going to be produced in Ukraine. There's not going to be any of these military production facilities for Rheinmetall or any of these companies in Ukraine. That's all nonsense. They would get hit in the first couple minutes of the pad being poured, right? You would never even have a stable foundation for the building because the Russians could just fly in and hit it at any given time. So yeah, I wouldn't pay attention too closely to anything like that. If a port is built, I mean, they already have a port. I don't know why they need to build a new one. All right. Somebody said something like this: Ukraine has a ton of factories that Russia hasn't hit. That's not true. I don't know where you get your information. Question: do you think that Russia does not take Odessa? Will it even matter since Ukraine is suffering so much damage? I have said that Russia will take Odessa. I think that is basically a mandatory at this point. I think that previously it wasn't, but I don't think it will be taken by a battle. I think that the Ukrainian army will not be able to defend at a certain point. I think they're going to be worn down in the east. Again, if you're talking about mobilizing the last group of men available, that's it. There's nothing else to mobilize after you mobilize that. So say that mobilization goes semi-successfully and the Ukrainians are able to stall through 2024 into 2025. Like I said, 2026 is probably when you're going to see this thing get wrapped up. And by that time, I mean, I don't see how the Russians could take less than exactly what they want. If the war goes that long and negotiations are ignored for that long, I mean, yeah. All right. Okay, everybody. That's an hour. I appreciate you all. Thank you guys so much for the donos. I will be back tomorrow. Probably an earlier one for some of my European followers. So, 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, something like that. Be ready. Also around 12 Eastern Standard Time, that podcast will be going up. So be sure to check that out. Thank you all so much for coming in and watching. I appreciate you all. Take care. Be safe. Go get some exercise. Breathe some air. Touch some grass. That's all I can say. Be healthy and love each other. Goodbye, guys.